And we talk about a great many things on this show, and today we're going to talk about something that perhaps we don't talk about often enough. And I'm going to speak to Mike Smith, who's from Glenzier Sporting, right? He runs a number of operations, you might say, in the sporting world. He's an aficionado of clay pigeon shooting. He's an aficionado of shooting of all kinds. He's got a shooting school. But he's also in the countryside, outside of the cities. We were talking just now about how many cities are being kind of hollowed out in some ways. As more and more people move away from them, as fewer and fewer people come to work in them, the country becomes a more important place. Let's talk to Mike now and find out what's going on. Mike, a very good afternoon. Welcome.
Hello, Mike. How are you doing?
Yeah, very well indeed. Thanks for joining us. I mean, it's a big subject. I know it is, so we're not going to pretend that we can just gloss over it in 5 minutes, but we can start a conversation which can continue over time. What are you finding is different over time since, say, the pandemic? The cities have changed, obviously, some of them unrecognisably. How has the countryside changed?
Yeah, well, Mike, you know, the pandemic's been a precursor for all sorts of things, all sorts of change. A lot of it bad. Our politics has changed generally. I mean, it's arguably failing society. The thing about the cities, what we have now, which is different around London and the southeast, which has always been a counter-urbanisation, people moving from the cities to the countryside, and of course the southeast is shaped very much by that. What we've got now is a flight from the cities. And, you know, quite often aided and abetted by political movements. You know, for example, development is a house building is a big issue. Of course it is. You've been talking about it on Talk TV for some time. The problem with that, of course, and you'll see this, as you go after a hard-working week, Mike, I've no idea how you managed to fit it all in, and you're down the A23, A24, A27 corridor back to home in Sussex. You know, you'll see this, and you'll probably see an unprecedented amount of development, house building. But what we're getting in the countryside on these precious greenfield sites, of course, is house dumping. Developers want it, developers like it, and this is changing the character of the countryside, and it's changing the political dimensions of our rural constituencies, which will be a factor in the next election, a very, very large factor, I think, you know, beyond recognition. And we see this constantly. It affects the countryside. Now, the countryside has always changed. It's a very dynamic thing, and elements of crisis has always shaped the British countryside. It's unique in many ways. It's a beautiful, beautiful place, and regularly the countryside, you know, is mentioned by various polls as being one of the aspects of modern life that people in Britain are most connected with, that most values. And yet, you know, it's being abandoned, it's being threatened, it's being undermined. And this is becoming a huge, huge issue, Mike.
Yeah, of course, because we saw actually in the American election, last presidential election, where places like Nevada and Colorado had kind of urban sprawl residents moving out of California, moving out of Los Angeles and San Francisco to other parts of the country, and suddenly they were turning Democrat. You know, where you've got like the cities like London, which has been now a Labour stronghold for such a long time. And you wonder whether the shires of this country and the south of England, which used to be guaranteed Tory voters, maybe are going to change.
Well, yes. I mean, it's very interesting. It's in a state of flux just now. The next general election next year, we think, you know, is going to be a very, very much a telling aspect on this. The Conservative Party is always, the countryside has been traditionally centre-right. It's traditionally been conservative. And that's very much a paternalistic part of the rural you know, history. The problem we have now is the countryside. First of all, it's crucial. Labour, any Labour or Conservative, if it wishes to form a meaningful majority, it needs rural seats. And, you know, there's round about 100 and just shy of 150 rural constituencies in England and Wales. Now, these are changing. Now, I predict, unfortunately, that the Conservative Party will get crushed in its rural stronghold. You know, the rural wall, if the Conservative Party hasn't come to terms with this already, your rural wall has fallen. The issue politically, and we found this in recent general by-elections, you know, Labour, Lib Dems winning and thinking, great, you know, we're back in the countryside. Keir Starmer famously said about a year ago, you know, don't worry, British countryside, you've nothing to fear from a Labour government. Yeah, well, you know, I've got news for him. But the problem is, if the Conservative Party doesn't address this very, very quickly, what we're going to get is rural voters not voting. So the countryside will become Labour, a mixture of Labour, Lib Dem by default. That's what's happened. That's what happened, during the 1997, Tony Blair, the famous landslide. It wasn't because the countryside went Labour. It's because traditional rural voters didn't know what to do. They didn't vote, and of course it becomes left of centre representation as of default, and that's a real problem. Because the countryside is a very, very complex, very, very dynamic institution, which needs certainty. It needs guidance, and it needs its very own social contract now. We've gone too far. The Conservative Party cannot possibly have failed to realise its support, wither away. And I think it's going to be a very, very interesting thing. I think it's an opportunity, for example, for a coalition of minor challenger parties to get together to form a cogent rural manifesto for the first time, a countryside social contract. If that is put to the rural electorate in the right way, do you know what? It could be very, very interesting. Because countryside people who work and live in the countryside want certainty. They want a voice, and right now it's being deprived of them in some of the cruelest ways. I mean, the devolved governments, for example, in my native land, Scotland, and in Wales, they appear to exist just simply as grievance engines against the countryside. You smash farmers, you smash landowning community, you lose what you value most. And countryside, which you and I both love, Mike.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Listen, Mike, we must talk some more, because there's a lot to talk about in terms of the countryside and what the government knows about it and what they know about what they might be losing. So I appreciate your time. We'll come back to you again. Mike Smith from Glenzier Sporting there, down on the outskirts of London, because there are all sorts of strengths and weaknesses within the land that we occupy. There's no reason why it has to be split into cities and countries, but that's kind of how it is. But at the moment, there is a massive threat, not least to the Tory party, of the Shires, going the other way and actually giving up on the Tories. And that is a serious problem for them. We'll bring that subject up again very, very soon. 0344 499 1000. Lanks Lad says this: reoffending rates. When a prison sentence is effectively an upgrade in lifestyles, people will reoffend. This is not rocket science. Big problems in the prison service. We'll talk about that. We'll take your calls. Coming next on Talk TV.